welcome to another episode of Talkoffame podcast. I hope everyone is getting through this crazy and snowy weather as it's going on and off here in Pennsylvania. I'm sure Sadie knows what the Philly, Pennsylvania weather is like. It's all crazy. But to get into things, we are joined by Sadie Sutton. Sadie's the host of one of my absolutely favorite podcasts, She Persisted, which is the teen mental health podcast, which is actually made for teens by a teen. And so in each episode, Sadie brings you authentic, accessible, relatable conversations about every aspect of mental wellness. She Persisted offers you a safe space to feel validated and understood in your struggle while encouraging you to take ownership of your journey and build your life worth living. This podcast is absolutely literally so good. I've been listening to it probably for a couple months now since like late last year, and I'm absolutely hooked on it. And I'm the type of person that always is taking new suggestions on mental health podcasts, especially. And when someone recommended this podcast to me, I knew I had to listen. As someone who's dealt with mental health crisis, I'm like, I need to listen to this podcast. So thank you so much, Sadie, for coming on and taking the time to chat. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Thank you for having me and thank you for all the kind words. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So, of course, with mental health, of course, everyone deals with mental health differently. And especially since the pandemic started back in 2020, everyone kind of took a different shift to mental health, being stuck at home. It took so much anxiety. But of course, with you, you kind of have dealt from what I read mental health, like with the mental health stuff. But like, can you tell us what your mental health journey is, like in case no one knows?
Yeah, so I started struggling with my mental health in middle school. I think a lot of teens can relate to their mental health changing really slowly and a little bit each day. And so that was very much the case for me. I don't remember exactly like a day where suddenly I was depressed and anxious and overwhelmed, but my belief system started slowly shifting. I started to become less effective with the way I was coping with things. I was more isolated from my relationships. And by the time I was in eighth grade, I ended up in this position where I was really depressed. I was really anxious. I was really isolated from my family and my friends, struggling with self harm and really just at a very low point mental health wise. And a lot of the ways that presented are really common. I wasn't sleeping very much. I wasn't eating very much. Lots of more conflict with my parents. Interestingly, I was like more engaged with homework and school. I kind of used that as an outlet to avoid what I was thinking about and feeling. Um, and a lot of anxiety, a lot of overwhelm, and really a lot of avoidance of what I was experiencing. I didn't understand that I was depressed. I learned for the first time when I went to a pediatrician appointment that my mom had me go to check in about my mental health. And I remember when he read all of the diagnostic criteria for depression, like less interest in things than you used to have, sleep that's disrupted, changes in diet, feeling really tearful or crying at random moments, feeling really low energy and low motivation, all of these things that he was describing, it was like, yes, every single one of these things I'm experiencing. And so that was the point where I kind of had a name and a label for what I was experiencing. And prior to that, I kind of just thought that was what my life looked like. I thought that was how my brain worked. I thought that was my baseline. I thought, well, maybe other people are happier from a day to day basis, but I don't remember a time when I didn't feel like this. This just must be what my life is like.
Mhm.
And there wasn't really, again, I was like avoiding what I was experiencing. I struggled a lot with the idea that there wasn't a reason that I was depressed. Now I can look back and say, coping skills were ineffective. I was isolated from my relationships. My belief systems were not great. I had really low self esteem. All of these things were not helping my mental health. But at the time, it was like I didn't go through a big transition. I didn't have a huge loss in my life. Like, why am I depressed? There wasn't like an event that then caused the depression. It just kind of slowly crept up on me. And so that was kind of my eighth grade year. And the next year and a half was really filled by everything you can imagine when it comes to treatment. So, different hospitalizations, intensive outpatient programs, group therapy, family therapy, CBT, DBT, anything and everything that you can imagine that you try locally before you look for a higher level of treatment. We tried. And at that point, I really didn't believe again that I was capable of recovery. I thought that this was how my brain worked. This is how I was meant to feel. I thought so low of myself that I was like, you deserve to be this sad. Like, this is the life that you're deserving of living. I didn't think I was capable of recovery. And even if I could be happy again, I didn't think I was deserving of that. And so while I was going through the motions of treatment, I really wasn't invested or engaged in it, and things weren't working, they weren't sticking. And so, halfway through my freshman year of high school, my parents found an incredible residential program right outside of Boston called 3 East at McLean Hospital. And they do intensive dialectical behavioral therapy, which we'll talk about what that is later in this episode. But it's an evidence based approach to treating depression and anxiety in teens. It's been adapted for so many different mental health challenges. And it was originally developed for adults that were struggling with borderline personality disorder and suicidal ideation. But it's really effective for teens that are struggling with emotion regulation and depression and anxiety and self harm and suicidal ideation. That was exactly what I was struggling with. And so I ended up being at that residential program for 14 weeks, and I came in the lowest of lows, super depressed, backed into a corner as far as what my options were because I couldn't stay at home. I wasn't really going to school very much. I was just consumed by my emotions day in and day out, and treatment wasn't working. And so there weren't a lot of steps forward. And my world had just gotten so small at that point. And so I was given this incredible opportunity to work with some phenomenal clinicians and do this treatment, which again is evidence based and really, really effective and giving you the skills to be able to navigate life and also build your life worth living. And so I did a lot of family therapy, a lot of individual therapy, a lot of learning coping skills, all of the different things you do in residential treatment, which we can get into if you're interested. But that was those 14 weeks. And I was able to leave no longer waking up depressed in the morning, which was such a foreign concept to not be like, okay, this is my day. I'm depressed. I hate everything and it's not going to change. I would wake up and be like, wow, I'm neutral. Like I just feel okay. And that was a really crazy thing, but it gave me a lot of hope. And so that was a big shift I noticed. I felt like I understood my anxiety enough to be able to cope with it and realize that it was not always things that were based in fact. It was more emotions, and I could cope with the emotions and they were going to pass, and that it wasn't necessarily a true threat or something that was actually going to happen. And a lot of intensive work during those 14 weeks, building a relationship with my parents, learning how to be vulnerable, all the things. And then after that, I did 14 months at a therapeutic boarding school to kind of maintain that progress before I went home and went back to the environment that I had struggled in before. And so I was in intensive treatment for a year and a half. And at the end of it, I started She Persisted because I had made such a 180 with my mental health. And I was so firmly entrenched in the belief that I wasn't capable of recovery. And I think a lot of teens share that belief when they're struggling. And I also think that when you're in treatment, you're in a vacuum of teens that are also struggling. Like maybe you have peers at school that aren't struggling, but when you're in treatment and when you're in therapy, it's all teens that are also in the thick of it. There's no voices there that are like, oh, I was in treatment 6 months ago, or I was there a year ago, and now I'm doing great. And this is how I got here. I felt like that was missing. And so many adults told me that it would get better and that things would change. And I didn't think that I had enough autonomy as a teen to truly make those changes. And so all of those factors combined, and the fact that I had access to such a phenomenal team and learned so many skills that I could have learned earlier on to prevent a lot of what I went through, I wanted to share that with other teens. And so I started She Persisted, and that was my sophomore year of high school. Now I'm a junior in college. So we are many years in and 170 episodes at this point. And my goal is really to create the resource that I wish I had when I was struggling, and have these conversations and help not only teens, but parents and people in their community that see someone struggling and don't know how to support them. And so that's kind of the podcast. And then I'm a psychology major at the University of Pennsylvania. So my goal is to become a clinical psychologist and also help teens on that level as well.
That's amazing. Like everything like you described, like with anxiety, depression, that was something that I have personally dealt with, back when COVID happened, like that summer of 2020, when of course with having mental health and dealing with that, you feel more isolated and trying to find things to really kind of distract you from feeling those feelings. And when you're not doing those things, you're like, what am I doing to myself? Like
Yeah.
what, like you just don't know what's going on and you don't know what to do with yourself. And sometimes you want to ask for support, but don't want to ask for support because I mean, some people, and I'm also one of those people that sometimes don't like to ask for help in certain things. And
Yeah.
with dealing with mental health, not a lot of people know how to support people with mental health, or what to say, what to do, or what to do in certain situations that a lot of people don't really know what to do in certain situation. And it's like with listening to different podcasts and like social media and stuff, that is such a great tool to be able to listen to different things on how to support people, which is amazing that you're doing all these things. But I want to ask you about DBT. Like I honestly didn't know about that until I read like everything you're doing to prepare for this interview. I honestly didn't know what that was. But I would honestly love to kind of learn more about DBT, like because I'm
Yeah.
like, might as well like ask. Because I'm like, I need to learn about this. Like
Yeah.
it's something definitely I think a lot of
For
listeners would like
sure.
in from.
Yeah, I'll give you a little crash course. So dialectical behavioral therapy is a treatment that was developed by a woman named Marsha Linehan. She worked at the University of Washington, and this was developed like within like the past 20, 30 years. Like this is not something that's been around for centuries or ages. Like this is a newer mental health treatment. And so Marsha Linehan actually struggled with her own mental health as a young adult. So when she was around our age, like late teens, early 20s, she actually was in an intensive treatment program and she struggled immensely with her mental health. And so her guiding principle in her career was that she had been to hell and her goal was to go back and save people from that. She understood intimately what it felt like to struggle in that way and feel so hopeless and so overwhelmed and so consumed with suffering. And so her life's goal was to help other individuals in that position come out of that place. And so she was an incredible, she's still alive, but she's an incredible researcher, an incredible psychiatrist. She was an incredible psychologist, and she had a very lengthy career. She did a lot of research. She worked with the suicide hotline when she was in college. She very spiritual. She did different stints leaning into mindfulness and Eastern medicine and all these different things. But when she was working at the University of Washington, she found this group of patients that most therapists didn't want to work with. They didn't want these patients on their caseload because these patients were extremely depressed and suicidal. And so it was a risk to have them on their caseload because you didn't know if they were going to have a suicide attempt or if they were going to be there for the next session or if they would ask for help if they got into that position. So
Mhm.
it was very high risk, but they were also so incredibly hopeless. So they weren't like the most enjoyable patients to enter a session with and be like, hi, like, welcome to therapy. And they're like, I hate everything. Nothing's ever going to change.
Mhm.
So she found this group of patients and she was like, this is who I want to work with. I want to try and create a treatment that helps these individuals that all these other clinicians have kind of not been able to help. And so she found that when she talked to these patients, that if you told them you need to accept your mental health, you need to accept your situation, you need to accept that these are the cards you've been dealt, they were like, are you kidding me? Like, you're telling me to accept this? This isn't my fault. Like, how dare you say that I have to accept this life that's so horrible? But when she said, let's work to change this. Let's problem solve. You're depressed, you're suicidal, you hate your life. Let's build you a different life. They were like, so you're saying that this is all on me? I didn't do this and now I have to solve these problems I didn't create for myself. Like, are you kidding me? And they really weren't responsive to either of these things. But when she used both of those together and she said, we're going to accept that these are the cards that you've been dealt and that this is a terrible, awful, horrible situation. And we're going to try and build this life worth living and try and take some steps forward, but also acknowledging how difficult and terrible and awful this is. They were really receptive. And so dialectical behavioral therapy is built on that idea of dialectics, two opposing things that are seemingly opposites but can be true at the same time. So dialectic of acceptance and change. There's dialectics that my lived experience or my truth and your truth can be true at the same time. You can be doing your best. You could also do better. Like these are all dialectics at play in DBT. And so And that was kind of the core philosophy of DBT. And so as she started doing these clinical trials and experimenting with how she could create a treatment to help these individuals, she came up with DBT skills. And this is this giant workbook filled with skills that basically teach you how to live life. And if you function well and you are not struggling with your mental health, you're probably doing a lot of these things. But like you and I have experienced, when you are struggling with your mental health, you tend to be less effective and you kind of get further and further and further away from that optimal way of functioning. So maybe instead of being like, I'm so hopeful about the future, things are going to change, they're going to get better. Now you're saying to yourself, everything sucks. I felt this way for so long, nothing's ever going to change. And this is what my life looks like for the rest of my life. So maybe it's the thought process. Maybe it's how you ask for help. Like you said, you get scared to ask for help. You get into that headspace of, I have to figure out everything myself. It's my mental health. I should be able to solve this problem. And so then you're not as vulnerable. You're not asking for support when you might need it. And so these DBT skills kind of ground you in what's effective. And there's 4 modules. There's mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, distress tolerance, and emotion regulation. So mindfulness is the principle she brings in from Eastern medicine, and it's like staying present, living in the moment, a lot of these more philosophical things in the way that we think about life, like the dialectics. Then we have emotion regulation. And those are the skills that keep us at our baseline and help us regulate emotions, because a lot of these people that DBT works for really struggle to regulate their emotions. And it feels like their emotions are ruling their life. And so you learn that when you take care of your physical health and take care of your physical illnesses, and you are getting enough exercise and you're eating balanced and you're sleeping enough and you're avoiding mood altering substances, that allows you to function at a better level than if you weren't doing those things. And that if we cope ahead for situations that might cause an intense emotion, we handle that better. And when we accumulate positives in our life and plan these really great moments, it helps our mental health. So those are kind of emotion regulation skills. Distress tolerance is tolerating distress. So this is crisis mode. This is like, I'm having a panic attack. I'm super angry. I'm crying after a breakup. Any of those moments where you're like at a 7 to 10 with emotional intensity. And that's things like if you're having a panic attack, you dunk your face in a bowl of ice water, and 100% of the time, your heart rate will decrease, your breathing rate will decrease, and those physical symptoms kind of lessen. So then you can focus on the mental and talk yourself out of that intense state. And so that's distress tolerance. And then interpersonal effectiveness is relationships. Relationships are at the core of human functioning and human flourishing. They're the number one determinant of physical health outcomes, which is really incredible. And they're also incredibly, incredibly important for mental health. We are evolutionarily in need of communities to survive. And so having healthy relationships is really important. So DBT gives you skills to be able to make requests effectively and get an objective met, to improve the relationship, to maintain your own self-respect in interactions, and do all those things that are really important to not maybe be a people pleaser or not be too assertive, and build those relationships that we all need in our lives. So those are the DBT skills. There are so many of them, but they're really effective for individuals that are like, I don't know what to do and my life sucks. And it's like, this, you use this skill. This skill will help you in this situation, and use the skill and it works, and it's amazing. So that's DBT. When you do DBT, you're also doing individual therapy. If you're a teen, you're doing family therapy. You're going to a skills group with your parents to learn these skills with a therapist. And then you're probably also working with a psychiatrist, and your therapist sits on a board with other therapists. They have like a little team that they meet and consult on cases. So it's very collaborative. But that is DBT. Again, evidence-based to help teens and a whole other number of demographics that are struggling with their mental health, and very specifically depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation.
That's so interesting. I never knew that. That's honestly something I should use when I'm dealing with one of those episodes. But do you use any of those things when you're dealing with one of those situations?
100%. And we can do like an example if you want. If you have any situations, like a specific emotion or a specific interaction that you want like a skill for, because there are so many. Do you have any that come to mind that you think would be helpful for listeners to hear?
Ooh, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is relationships.
Relationships. So, one thing that I think is really common and a big point of conflict, especially for teens and adults as well, is making a request. Like you have an objective. So, maybe you're going to your parents and you're like, I want to go to this party. And I know you're going to say no. And then you get into a big argument. Your parents like, you're grounded. You can't go at all, blah, blah, blah. In DBT, we have a skill called Dear Man. And this is how you make an effective assertion and you do everything in your power to make this go the right way. You try and be as skillful as possible. So it's an acronym that stands for describe, express, assert, reinforce. Be mindful, appear confident, and negotiate. So if you were going to ask your parents, you would describe the situation objectively, only using facts. There's this party at this person's house. The parents will be there. I would be driven by this person. I would leave at this time and be back at this time. I'll have my phone on me. I will text you throughout the party if that makes you feel more comfortable. Explaining the facts, like what are the objectively true things about the situation. Then we get into the express. I would really love to spend time with my friends. It would make me really happy to be able to go and connect with my peers and do this. We're recording this during winter break and celebrate the holidays. And I am feeling really hopeful about potentially getting to go to this. I would feel really sad if I didn't get to spend this time with my friends and whatever else you might want to add there. Then we do an assert. So you ask them a yes or no question. Can I go to this party? And they don't have to respond then, but then you come in with the reinforcement. So what is in this for your parents? And this is really important. So maybe you say, it's on a Friday. Wouldn't it be so fun if you guys actually like went out and did like a little date night and got to spend the night by yourselves while I am at this party? Or I know you guys had a bunch of work you needed to catch up on. I would be out of the house and you guys could focus on getting your taxes done or whatever it is that they have to get done. So what is in it for them that they are going to benefit from this situation? Or maybe you're like, I know you've been so annoyed that I'm just like so bored and looking for things to do during winter break. This would be a really great way for me to get out of the house and see friends. And then the second part of Dear Man is kind of just how you're approaching the situation. At that point, after you've done the Dear part of it, you give them the opportunity to respond. Or if your parents are the kind of person that don't like to be put on the spot and give an answer, and you probably know what kind of person they are, say, I don't need an answer now, but that's the situation and the request I'd like to make. And do you want to talk about it tomorrow? And so with the man part of the skill, you are maintaining mindfulness. So you're being present in the moment. You're using body language that shows that you're engaged and listening and you want to be there. You're paying attention to their body language. You're making eye contact, all the things. You're appearing confident. So you're making your request. You've planned out what you're going to say. You feel good about the request you're making to them. And then negotiate. When they give you an answer, maybe they're like, yeah, like we're really not feeling great about this. We would be fine with you going to dinner with your friends, but we don't really feel great about you coming back at like 1 or 2 in the morning. Then you'd say, I totally understand that. How would you feel about an 11 p.m. curfew? So you kind of like meet in the middle. And I think, I mean, this is subjectively, but if I was a parent and my teen came to me with like that thought out and intentional ask and like thought about all the potential concerns, that's going to go a lot better and they'll actually consider it versus like, can I go to this party? No, you suck, argument and conflict ensues. So that's kind of one skill that you can use that DBT gives you that you can use in any situation. You could use it to ask your teacher for an extension. You could use it with a friend that you wanted to set a boundary with. There are so many different ways that you can do the Dear Man skill. But whenever you have an objective in a relationship and an interaction, that is when you use the Dear Man skill.
That's so interesting. I would definitely use those in future outings because, like, that's a better way to go in things like that. But I want to thank you so much for jumping on for a interview for the podcast. It was so fun getting to talk with you. I definitely need to do a part 2 on this. I have so many more questions I have to ask you, but I really appreciate you coming on to get time and thank you everyone for listening. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. And where can people find you on social media if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, so Instagram and TikTok, I am at She Persisted Podcast. My website is shepersistedpodcast.com, where you can find all the links to the podcast and YouTube. Send me an email if you have an email. I'm always there via like DMs. Feel free to follow, comment, any of the things. I spend most of my time on Instagram and TikTok and try to post a lot of content there about mental health.
Perfect. Everyone go check her out. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day. And thank you so much, Sadie, for coming on. It was so great chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.